Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. I hope you are doing well. It is a lovely sunny day and I'm stuck in isolation still, so I'm just counting down the last couple of days till I can get back out in the world. But over on Instagram I did put up a little question box for you to ask me anything about diabetes, life, my pump transition, all that kind of good stuff. And I actually got quite a few responses back, and I thought instead of doing like a long story going through all the answers to all the questions, because I know I can ramble and I always want to give as much information as I can, I thought instead of doing a story I would just film it as a Q&A over here on YouTube. And yeah, so that's what we're going to do. I haven't looked at these in advance, so I'm just going to tell you what comes to mind in the moment. And the first question is, how do you maintain your weight as a diabetic? I have so many videos all about exercising and fat loss and stuff as a type 1 diabetic, and in all of them I say the same thing, which is that it is literally no different if you weren't diabetic. There's no one special diet that helps you maintain weight. There's no one special exercise regime that helps you maintain weight or lose weight. The way that you lose weight is in a calorie deficit, which means eating fewer calories than what you use in a day. And this doesn't mean like how many calories you burn through exercise, it's how much you need for the whole day. There's loads of macro calculators you can use online, and you don't have to be that rigid with it. You don't have to track macros, you don't have to count your calories, but if you want to get like a rough idea of how many calories you need depending on your activity level and your age, your height, all that kind of stuff, get a rough idea online, and then just get a rough idea of what you're eating generally, and like maybe track for like a week, see what you're averagely eating. And if you find that you're in a period where you're putting on weight and you want to lose weight, then just minus a bit from what you're already eating. Or if you want to maintain your weight, then just carry on what you're eating already. And if you want to put on weight and you want to put on muscle, then again get an average of what you're eating already and then add on a bit. And the crucial thing there is to like make sure you're getting enough protein. But there's nothing different about being diabetic. Being diabetic doesn't mean that you can't lose weight or maintain weight or work on specific aesthetic goals. It is literally calories in versus calories out. The one thing that is going to really help you is having your blood sugars as stable as possible. The way to maintain weight as a type 1 diabetic is to maintain good blood sugar control, because if you're constantly having high blood sugars, it means your body isn't using fuel efficiently, you won't be able to train to your best, and obviously it's just not healthy or good for you in the long term. If you're constantly going low while trying to maintain weight, and that means you're eating a lot of hypo snacks, then obviously if that's constant and you're constantly eating lots of high calorie hypo snacks, then there's potential that you will be putting on weight. And equally, again, you won't be able to train at your full capacity if you're constantly suffering from hypos. So the only difference about being a type 1 diabetic is do everything that a normal person does to maintain weight, and then keep your blood sugars in as good a control as possible. But again, I'll link the video where I talk about how to lose weight as a type 1 diabetic, and all of my other like exercise related videos down below if you want to explore anything that I've said in more detail. Okay, next question, least favourite day of the week and why? I think Tuesday, because Monday I'm quite motivated, by Tuesday I'm not as motivated, and I've still got quite a long way to go until the weekend. And also I like the days where I train legs, which is Monday and Wednesday the most in terms of my training schedule. Tuesday isn't a bad day, to be fair, it's one of my like lower intensity workouts. But yeah, I just don't get much of a kick on a Tuesday. Does the diabetes still feel overwhelming, or do you get used to it? That is a really hard question, because I feel like I always go through stages. Like when I got my retinopathy diagnosis, obviously then I felt hugely overwhelmed, hugely in the dark about my diabetes, even though I've been diagnosed for 16 years, hugely like fearful for my future and very apprehensive. Then day to day, like I don't feel overwhelmed by it anymore. I think now I've got the pump as well, that's going to help a lot. And yeah, I only tend to really feel overwhelmed when I have a bad day, and don't get me wrong, those aren't rare. Like diabetes is always a constantly moving and evolving condition. Your body is constantly adapting, you have to constantly rearrange your like approach to your diabetes as you grow and as you develop and as the seasons change and as you have periods, and all of these things happen in life, and everything that happens in life can affect your diabetes. And so going through those transitional phases, those can be quite overwhelming, and sometimes I do feel a bit like I'm stuck in a routine with my diabetes, and if I deviate from my normal daily routine, then I have to think of all of these different considerations for my diabetes that a non-diabetic person wouldn't have to think about. Like if they had a rest day, or they weren't feeling so energetic that day, or they slept badly, fine, they'll get on with their day, whereas I then have to think, well, what do I need to now do with my insulin to accommodate for this change in routine? And so sometimes I feel like diabetes does kind of put you in a bit of a box and does put some constraints on you, but realistically they're not constraints. You just have to think more, be more proactive, and have a plan for when you're off plan. How are you managing insulin sensitivity while in isolation? So as a background, if you don't follow me on Instagram or haven't seen, so I'm in isolation because of COVID. I got COVID, today is Saturday, and I got COVID last Wednesday, so it's been about 10 days now. I'm in isolation for 12 days because my boyfriend didn't get symptoms until 2 days after me, and in the UK it's 10 days. It's 10 days of isolation from when symptoms started, and if you're living with someone who gets symptoms, it's based off of the like most recent one, if that makes sense. So to be honest, like having the fact that I'm not just isolating from like a contact or being like asked to isolate through test and trace, and I actually had COVID, did make it a bit different because obviously I was very ill. So the first day or two my insulin resistance was crazy. I was having really high blood sugars that I couldn't get down no matter what I was doing. I've got a vlog coming out next week where I actually talk about that a bit, and how I just had, I'd say not even 2 days, like 1.5 days where no matter how much insulin I had, it wouldn't come down. I was on over 200% basal, correction after correction, still really high, while the infection was at its peak. And then after that, I then woke up after a terrible night of blood sugars where they wouldn't come down, and from that day then I got quite a lot more sensitive to my insulin and was having quite a few lows. I think as my body was then not at the peak of the infection and was expending extra energy to fight off the COVID and deal with the infection. That lasted for about 3 or 4 days. So yeah, for those few days it was actually quite nice because I wasn't having to worry about having loads of extra insulin. I was pretty much back to a normal sensitivity. And then after then was when it got a bit tricky because my body was no longer using the extra energy to fight off the infection. I felt largely better. I was just really tired for a lot of days, so I didn't have the energy to do anything. And also being in isolation, obviously you can't go anywhere. Like normally if I'm high I would go for a walk, whereas I can't leave my flat, and we also don't have any outside space, so it does become quite suffocating and quite tricky to manage and get motivation for. Like normally if all else fails, my diabetes will motivate me to do something active because I want to keep on top of my blood sugars, but I just was so exhausted but not massively ill. And I'm kind of came to the realization that I just needed these 10 days of isolation to just not worry about my diabetes and not worry about being active and doing things. I think like most people, when COVID first hit in 2020 and we were all locked up and no one knew what was happening, everyone took that opportunity to relax, take time for themselves, like take the foot off the pedal for a bit and recover. I didn't do that because I just felt like I had too much on my plate. Like it was my final year at uni and we had no idea what was happening with our exams. We all got sent home very last minute, no plan with what was going to happen. We didn't know like what was going to happen to our grades. So I was working really hard until I graduated, and then after that I was so scared about not getting a job. I then threw myself into, I did like 2 different internships. I started my YouTube channel, so I had to learn all of that. I was doing a sports nutrition course, and I just threw myself into doing everything that I could to get myself as many skills and as much knowledge as possible on top of doing applications to jobs. So I never had that little like respite that I think quite a lot of people took and that I think I needed after finishing my final year. Like I was meant to finish final year, I was meant to have like loads of end of uni celebrations, have weeks off, have like 2 weeks of parties. I was then meant to go to Croatia and have a holiday. None of that happened, and I just threw myself straight into getting stuff done. And so whereas I normally, if I'm in this kind of situation, would make the best out of a bad situation, like I would do as much activity as I could in the situation that I was in, and I would eat as healthy as I could in the situation that I was in, I decided like screw that, I need these days to just heal, recover, and just take that pressure off of myself. So in terms of managing insulin sensitivity, I just did lots of extra insulin. I've done, by the end of the 12 days, I would have done 2 dumbbell workouts, because I did get to a point where I did feel like I just didn't want to do anything all day. Like, I would work on the sofa, and because you have no breakup of the day, and like I said, I just kind of threw all motivation out the window. I just couldn't stop lying down. I just got myself in this big funk. So I did do 2 dumbbell workouts, really light ones, as I was recovering from COVID. They were only like half an hour, and that did help to like get my insulin sensitivity back a little bit. And if you do have the motivation and you do want to be doing exercise, I would recommend doing whatever you can. If you normally weight train, if you have any dumbbells at home you can use, or if not, doing forms of resistance workouts, so like body weighted, like push-ups, pull-ups if you have a bar, tricep dips, squats, anything where you can add some resistance. That will really help you keep your insulin sensitivity as high as possible. But yeah, for me, I just needed these days to not think about that, and to just lie down, and to not put an agenda on every single day and a schedule, and just allow myself to just exist. So that's what I did. I had lots of extra insulin. I'm so grateful that I got my pump just before going into isolation, because it did mean that I can adjust my basal rates throughout the day as and when is appropriate. If you don't have a pump, I would probably recommend going somewhere in the middle with your long-acting insulin, as to like the long-acting insulin you would take if you're super resistant compared to your normal. Go somewhere in between, and if you find that you're having lots of highs, you will just need to add an extra percentage onto each of your bolus doses. And if you're having highs in between meals, or if you're not really able to eat, you may find that you need to just have like a unit or a couple of units every few hours, just to prevent you from going high, even if you're not eating anything. But always like speak to your diabetes team about the sick day rules if you're isolating because of COVID. And even if you're not isolated because of COVID, and you just find that you're getting really resistant to your insulin because of isolation, I highly recommend using the sick day rules. They work really well. It's what I did in terms of working out how much extra bolus I needed for my usual insulin amounts and my like level of sensitivity. Ask your clinic for the sick day rules. It will really, really help. And if you are still really worried about your sensitivity, then like I said, do weighted workouts. Also just do little bits of activity throughout the day. So when I had the motivation, I would go and I would like empty the dishwasher, do the washing up and clean the kitchen. And although it's not a lot, compared to just lying flat on the sofa and doing literally nothing, that always really kick-started my sensitivity again. So if you find you've been resistant for a few hours and you're just sat around, just do a little something, just clean something, just move, and stop watching Netflix. Okay, the next question is about the pump. How did you get the pump? Were you offered it? Did you have to meet criteria? So I answered all of these questions in a lot of detail in 2 of my videos, which was one of them which was why did I want an insulin pump, and the other one was how to get an insulin pump in the UK. So bearing in mind, obviously this is like based in England and my experience, but just to quickly summarise, I wanted an insulin pump because I have very fluctuating insulin sensitivity, especially around my periods, which was causing me to have days, like 2 or 3 days in a row, where I'd have literally between 5 and 10 hypos every day and not be able to move, and then have stubborn highs for a few days while I worked out new like basal doses around my period, and that happens obviously every month, and it became like unlivable. So I wanted one. I wasn't offered one. I had to then speak to the diabetes team. You do have to meet criteria. I'm not going to list them out now, but they are all in that video about how to get an insulin pump. In England, it did take 13 months from asking to getting a pump. For me, that's because pump clinics were on hold for a lot of COVID, because the nurses were having to work in intensive care and couldn't run pump clinics. And also I moved to London, and so I had to move from my old clinic to my new clinic. So while all that was getting set up, that was all my pump and stuff was on pause. So it will take a couple of months. There are criteria you need to hit. You need to have a reason to be wanting a pump, but speak to whoever you next speak to at your diabetes clinic. Say you're looking into one, if you are wanting to get one, and ask who to speak to, and they will take you through the process. But again, I can link down below a really helpful JDRF webpage where they explain the criteria that you need to hit to get a pump, and I will link the video again where I mention it. What are your thoughts on air travel as a type 1 diabetic? Which is an interesting question, because I don't really have any thoughts on it. I've never seen it as a problem or an issue. I suppose one thing you need to do is make sure that your insulin stays cold, especially if you're going somewhere that is very warm. So having like a Frio pack to keep your spare insulin, making sure that you take lots of spare supplies, take at least double what you think you will need, and take as much as you can in your hand luggage rather than your checked luggage in case your bag gets lost. That is super, super important. I will have to speak to my diabetes team again about getting a note for my CGM and for my pump to go through the airport security, so make sure you have that in place, like a letter to say that you can't take these things off of your body, and if they alert like any of the sensors, there's a reason why, and it's signed by a doctor, you'll need to do that. But other than that, I don't really have any thoughts. How was COVID, and have you been vaxxed? So COVID was fun. No, so I have been vaxxed. I had 2 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine, and yeah, I kind of just, I guess in the previous question I did answer this when I was saying about insulin sensitivity. I was very ill for a few days. I'd say from Wednesday I started to get a bit ill. By Wednesday night I was very, very ill. Wednesday night through to about Friday night I was quite ill, and then from Friday I stopped feeling ill, but I was very exhausted, very tired. No, I wouldn't even say that, no. By Monday I was still quite ill, because I did have Monday off work. And yeah, and after that I was not really ill, I was just very exhausted, and like I said, the first like 24 to 48 hours I had extreme insulin resistance. No amount of insulin was bringing it down, and then after that I became quite sensitive to my insulin again, before like the virus was out of my system. And in terms of, I realised that, so I did a lateral flow test which came back negative on the Tuesday. By the Wednesday, because I just had a bit of like a cough and I was just feeling quite run down, by the Wednesday it felt very much like a virus or something, so I went to get a PCR test and isolated from then, and that PCR test came back positive. I got those results on the Thursday morning, but before I even looked at the results I knew I had COVID, because on the Wednesday night when I got really ill I felt exactly the same as I did after the jabs. So for me, after both my first and second dose of the vaccine, I felt very, very ill for about 3 or 4 days. I was exhausted, I had an awful headache, had no energy, and just like flu-like symptoms. And that's I had that exact same headache on the Wednesday night while I was trying to sleep, and I knew that I would wake up in the morning and have a positive COVID result. So yeah, I'm very, very grateful for the fact that I did have the vaccine, because I was very ill for, like I said, 24, 48 hours. And if I hadn't had the vaccine, I do feel like I probably would have been one of those people that ended up in hospital, because like I would have been even more ill than I was having had the vaccine. Have you switched to the Libra 2 yet? No, I haven't. I will be soon. When I got the pump last Monday, or the Monday before last, my diabetes nurse who did the pump said that she would write to my GP to get my prescription changed over to the Libra 2, so I can order those as of, I think, next Tuesday, and so the next time I pick up my prescription I will have the Libra 2, but I've got 2 more of the current Libras to get through before I switch. Next question is pump or insulin pens. This is hard because obviously I haven't had the pump for long, I've had it for like 2 weeks now, but what I will say is I feel like it's literally saved my life during COVID. Being able to change my basal settings at the drop of a hat and have those changes come into effect within the hour has been life-changing and revolutionary, and opened my eyes to the fact that I willingly lived without a pump for a long time. When I was a child I was offered a pump and I didn't want one. It is a lot easier to get diabetes technology when you're a child. I said no because I didn't like the way it looks, and then yeah, when you're an adult it then becomes a lot harder to get a pump, and when I finally decided I wanted one, it was quite the process. And so realising that I could have had this ease and this technology available to me for a lot of years is kind of annoying to me, that I waited this long to get it. However, it completely depends on you and what you need. Like if I didn't have such fluctuating insulin sensitivity on my period, I probably wouldn't get the pump, because it is you do have to do a slight change every 3 days. You do have to have a lot more supplies than if you were on pens, and I feel like with pumps there is a lot more room for it to go wrong, as opposed to pens. And so there is that extra little stress, like, oh, if you're high, you do think like, oh, is there a kink in my cannula, is there something wrong with my pump? Whereas if you're high on pens, you know, you just haven't had enough insulin. So I would say it depends. If you feel like you need one, then I would 100% get a pump as soon as you possibly can, because it gives you so much freedom. But having said that, I have only had the pump during isolation, so I'm excited to get out and do things and see how the pump benefits me or not in like day-to-day life, like when I'm back at the office and also doing social events. I can't wait to have my first pizza on a pump and do like an extended bolus rather than having to inject myself 5 times. I have an extremely slow digestion, and when you topple high carbs, high fat pizza on top of my extraordinarily slow digestion, I'm still digesting that pizza from the night before at the lunch the next day. So I do have to have about 5 injections for pizza. So I'm very excited to have my first pizza on the pump. Are you feeling better? I am feeling much better now, thank you. I did have a few days where I wasn't necessarily ill, I was just very tired. But again, I think that had a lot to do with being in isolation and not having the motivation to do anything and literally just lying down all day. What was the lowest your sugar levels ever went, and how did it feel? I don't know. I've been in the low ones. I've been around 1.2 before, I think. And it didn't feel nice. I've never been to hospital for a low, thank God. But I have had to use glucogel, not the glucagon pens with the injection. I've never had those, but I've had the glucogel in my cheek about 3 times in my life, so 3 times in 16 years. And it mainly just feels like I personally felt very panicked. I get very, very sweaty. I feel my heart go very, very fast. I feel quite weak. And yeah, a lot of it is just panic and not feeling like you need to act urgently to obviously save your life, but also not having the willpower to get up and get food and do something is quite stressful, and just feeling like you don't have control over your body and you don't have control over your mind to tell your body to move. That's how I feel a lot of the time. I did have one when I was younger where I couldn't feel my arms. My arms were like behind me. I was like quite new to diabetes. My arm was like behind my back like this for some reason. I don't know why. And I was crying to him like, I can't feel my arm, I can't feel my arm, like I can't feel it, I don't know where my arm is. And my mum had to like help me like trace down, like feel down to my elbow and then like work out where my hands were. So that was really, really scary. I've had one as well where I hallucinated. This was one of my other glucogel incidents where this sounds so weird, but I was quite young and I hallucinated that my mum was an alien and that she was trying to kill me by giving me food, which obviously is not the ideal situation because the food is going to save my life, and I just didn't want to eat it because I thought my mum was an alien trying to kill me. So that was interesting. So yeah, the hallucination ones I think are obviously the scariest, or the ones where you feel like an out-of-body experience. But like I said, I've been diabetic for 16 years and it's only happened 2 or 3 times, so I'm very grateful for that. Favourite hobby and diabetic friendly snacks. So my favourite hobby is probably walking, or weights, either or. And I'm not going to talk about my love of weights right now because I could go on forever. And diabetic friendly snacks, I know this is genuinely like a curious question, but I hate the term diabetic friendly. If anyone says diabetic friendly food to me, I'm like, diabetic friendly foods don't exist. Lots of type 1s choose to eat low carb, and if you mean low carb food, that's fine, but don't call it diabetic friendly, because if you do choose to go so low carb, your body starts to use protein and fat and turn that into glucose rather than carbohydrates, which means you need to then still inject for the protein and the fat instead of just injecting for carbohydrates. So you still need to have calculations and ratios and doses and injections, and that doesn't seem friendly to me. So no matter what happens, no matter what I eat, I still have to inject, right? So I don't see any food as diabetic friendly. I see food as just food, and it either has carbs in it or it doesn't, and I have a ratio, and I either use my carbohydrate ratio or I use my protein and fat ratio, and I inject and I eat the food. But if you're asking for low carb snacks, I will link a video here where I did a whole week's worth of low carb snacks when I did try low carb for a little while, and there's loads of like sweet treats in there as well as savoury snacks. In general, snacks that I love popcorn. I do like sugar-free jelly. I like eating fruit as a snack. I do eat a lot of like rice cakes and mini rolls. What kind of pump are you getting? So I got the Roche Solo micro pump. I've got it on my leg. I did my first leg site. And yes, I will be doing a full review of this pump as and when I have been using it for long enough to feel like I have enough information to give you. Don't know if you're on the pill, but if you are, did you find any effects on your blood glucose? I was on the pill, I came off the pill. I was on the pill for like 8-9 years. Came off last June because I didn't like the effects of the hormones on my body anymore. I have a whole video all about the pill and how it affected my blood sugars, how I felt before and after the pill. That video is, I would say, kind of like incomplete though, because at the point of filming that video, I thought my hormones had like flattened out and I was back to where I would be, but I actually wasn't, and I've only now, like a year later, flattened out my hormones. Like, it takes a long time to flush that all after your system. But I will link that video here, and I'll also link a video about managing your periods, or managing your period as type 1 diabetic, because there are lots of things to consider. But yeah, I found on the pill that I had lots and lots and lots of hypos on my period. I found that I became very insulin resistant just before my period, which is kind of similar to how I am off of the pill, except it was more dramatic while I was on the pill. And yeah, I'll just link that video because there's a lot to say. Okay, and the final question is, what is the best thing to come out of diabetes? And I think that is such a good question. I love that question because I love trying to be as positive as possible about diabetes. And I'd say for me, it's probably the self-awareness that it's given me, because I have to constantly know what's happening with my body, and so I feel very in tune with my body, because I know from my diabetes, I know if I've been lying down and lazy for 3 hours that my insulin resistance is going to increase, and then that is reflected with high blood sugars. And so I know that it's probably not good for me to be lying down for that long if I have no reason to be, if I'm perfectly healthy and I'm just being lazy, right? And so it gives me that awareness to get up and just do something, even if it's, like I said, just going and doing some cleaning. And yeah, I know when I'm getting ill because I get very insulin resistant. I know when I have started to build muscle, even if I'm not yet seeing it in the mirror, I become more sensitive to my insulin because of the extra muscle that I have. I know when I'm getting my period because my insulin sensitivity fluctuates, and I'm very aware of my body and all the different things that can be affecting my body, and it's reflected in my diabetes. So I suppose it kind of is two things, but whatever. The kind of sense of responsibility that it gives you, because not only are you responsible for doing the job of an organ, and you're responsible for all of your like day-to-day food, diet, exercise, insulin, having to think about prescriptions and GP appointments and all of those kind of things, lots of like just little life admin things that you learn very early on that I may not necessarily have learned if I hadn't been diabetic. And because I was doing it from quite a young age, I was ordering my prescriptions by myself from when I was a child, and picking them up as soon as I could drive, and dealing with the doctors myself. It put a lot of responsibility on my shoulders, because obviously it's really important that you get your prescriptions, and so it taught me to just take responsibility for the little things in life really early on, which I'm very grateful for, because it meant that I could grow up and not have to worry about these things when I like moved to uni or anything, because I was already doing them. So yeah, I guess self-awareness and a sense of responsibility are some great things to come from diabetes. But yes, I realise I've been talking for quite a long time now, so I will end this Q&A here. Thank you for sending in all of your questions. I hope I have managed to answer some of them helpfully and give you a bit more information into yeah, my experience, I guess, with the pump, with COVID, with weight training and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I will see you next time with another video all about the pump. Bye!